How good are the summons in Oblivion Remaster for Master Mode, and what summons are actually good? So let's evaluate these things. First, we have the starter skeleton. This is okay filler until you get something better. You start off with it if you tag Conjuration as a major skill, and outside of that, you're not going to really be running this thing. When you get anything better, which there are 3 things that are summonable outside of this in Apprentice level, and they are significantly stronger than the skeleton, but it's okay for like levels 1 to 3. Honestly, you should rush getting like Scamp or something else, but we'll talk about that in a second. All right, next we have Zombie. Zombie is okay filler. It has more damage than the skeleton, and it has more health. It's only a little bit more expensive to cast. You do not run this in endgame. Just because I put it in B tier does not mean it's viable in endgame. It's just good filler until you get something better. So if you want to play organically, where as you level up, you run better summons instead of power leveling to 100. You can run this for, I would say, levels like 3 to 10, and then you should probably replace it with something else, especially as you hit 50 Conjuration. But it's serviceable. Same thing with Scamp. Scamp is just like a better zombie. Similar health. It has a fireball. The fireball can be relevant against certain enemies, but it's also nice because it gives the Scamp something to do at range. So they do have fireball, and they do have a little bit more damage, so it's a little bit better than zombie. And then Ghost is interesting because it's very similar to Scamp in that it has a few different spells. Now, according to the wiki, it has 50% normal weapon resist instead of 100, which is good early game, assuming that's still in the remaster. But even if it doesn't have that, it still has decent health. It has 2 spells, and it has the same damage as Scamp. But it does have a little bit less health than the zombie. But it does have 2 spells. So it has more damage than zombie and 2 spells, and potentially 50% normal weapon resist, which would make it tankier than the Scamp. So if that's the case, it is better than Scamp. If not, it's around here. But it's so low level, it doesn't really matter. Either way, they're about the same. Next, we have the Apprentice level stuff. Or I'm sorry, the Journeyman level stuff. The Skeleton Guardian. So 170 health, 8 points of melee. Now, this is for the original. In the remaster, some things change. So let's actually open that so we get actual values if those are updated. They don't seem to be, but usually, from what I've noticed, they've nerfed the values. So if you check the wiki, you might be thinking I'm getting 170 health, but you might actually be getting like 90. They did nerf some of the summons overall. This thing seems bad. Actually, like honestly, it just seems straight up bad. There are better options in Journeyman, and its damage. It has 8 points melee damage. That's really low. From what I understand, they actually nerfed the damage on summons too, and on most Daedra. So these like point values for old Oblivion are not 100% accurate, but relatively speaking, like if something does 10 damage and something does 20, they both have had their damage nerfed for the most part. But the Skeleton Guardian is just not good at Apprentice level. There's better things. It's just a melee thing. It doesn't do anything special. The Headless Zombie, however, is fine. The Headless Zombie is good filler. It has similar health to Skeleton Guardian, but it has like triple its damage. It's just way better. There's no way of getting around that. It's just significantly stronger. Next, we have Flame Atronach. Flame Atronach is interesting because it has 2 fire spells, but sometimes it runs into fire range and does like a terrible melee attack. Honestly, I'm putting these in high C tier. If you do a fire ramp and then they hit with a fireball, it can one-shot. But beyond that, sometimes they're very inefficient with their damage, and they'll just like fly up to an enemy and go for their weak melee attack, which is terrible. And you don't want that, and it's just not very good. So I honestly kind of don't recommend running them unless you're using Fire Ramp, because at least then they can deal meaningful damage, but otherwise, they're really not the best. They also have weakness to Shock, which doesn't really matter. Certain enemies have Shock, most don't, but it's kind of a toss-up. Next is just the standard Dremora. So the standard Dremora, it has some interesting effects. It has a little bit of tanking on it. It has lower HP relative to the other things. I haven't really noticed it popping off, but I think it's about like C tier. I think the Headless Zombie is just a little bit better because it has better damage. It just has a big health pool, so it just runs in and smacks things. It can also give things diseases. I don't know if NPCs can get diseases like enemy humans, but zombies can give you diseases, because I've tried training on a summoned zombie and it was giving me diseases, and I was like, oh, well, that's cool. So I'm not sure if that really factors in or not, but the fact that it just has a big melee attack and health bar, it's like, that's really what you want from a summon for the most part, damage and health, or some utility if they have it. But that's it for the Journeyman and the Apprentice. So now we're on to the expert level. So expert level is super competitive. There are a ton of really good things in expert level. So skeleton hero, definitely bad. Doesn't do that much damage. It has a decent health pool, but so does everything in expert level. It's just not good. It's just weak. A lot of the skeletons are just weak. They don't have enough that they bring to the table. The Daedra are just much better. Next we have Clan Fear. So Clan Fear is interesting because Clan Fears actually have damage reflect, and the summoned one does as well. So essentially it has like 20% damage reflect, and it also has big base damage and is fast and rushes things down. I would say it's B tier. It's decent. In terms of cost, its cost is a lot cheaper than everything else in its category for the most part, outside of, actually no, Skeleton Champion. We haven't gotten to that yet. It is a little bit more expensive than Skeleton Hero, but Skeleton Hero is bad, so that's not something we would seriously consider using. But it's serviceable, it rushes things down, does damage. Next is Daedroth. I think Daedroth is an endgame summon that you get early. It's also cheap. If you just throw a few defensive buffs on it, like just one, it's good enough. So when you summon a Daedroth, it actually uses a shield spell on itself that's like 20% shield for 45 seconds. And if you throw even like 55 shield on it for 45 seconds or whatever, you can make it tanky enough that it can actually win team fights. So if you make a custom Daedroth spell that does like 60-second duration and then throw, 45 seconds of tank on it, it should win team fights. Now, the only downside to it is if you're fighting Spider Daedra that paralyze, because it'll just get paralyzed. So unless you want to cast Resist Paralyze on it, which you probably don't, that's the only thing that counters it. Otherwise, it can straight up win team fights. Even if you just use it as like a distraction, it usually does good damage before it dies because it attacks quickly. It just like leaps on things for big damage. It has higher damage than Clan Fear. So it could be useful for that. And also if you fight with it, it's good. And it's also a great thing to soul trap because it's easy to kill for you with magic, because it doesn't have any magic absorb or resist or anything like that. You can just nuke it down easily. Soul trap it into Azura's Star. It's good for like so many different things. It's good for utility. It's good to carry with buffs. It's good for general combat. If you're fighting alongside it, especially if the enemies are distracted by you, then it's just getting in big damage for free. So it's pretty nice for like several different use cases, and it's also cheap relative to other things. Next we have the Fated Wrath, which has some interesting things, but I don't think it tanks physical because every time I summon it, Zivilize just like bitch slap it and then it just dies. So I don't think it's even good. It has okay damage. I'll put it in B tier because it has okay damage, but it seems to just get killed by things that you want it to tank, and it's not an actual ghost. Well, this is, all right, so this is the Fated Wrath. There's actually a higher level of this, but its melee damage is okay. It's like acceptable. Usually they have like, I think just claws. They don't have swords like they do in the actual game, but they can silence. They have some frost spells. So the Fated Wrath could be better with ramping frost because it has essentially 3 frost abilities plus silence. So it has some utility that kind of brings something to the table. So maybe it might be better than I'm giving it credit for, but for now, we'll just put it here. Next, we have Skeleton Champion, the final level of Skeleton. So it costs a lot to summon this thing relative to other summons. It actually costs more to summon this than even some, I think, like some master levels. So this thing, all the skeletons are just like just the starter skeleton is good, and then the other ones are just not competitive with other options. They just don't deal enough damage and they die too quickly. So all the other skeleton summons, aside from the starter one, are, I think, bad. Next, we have Frost Atronach. So Frost Atronach has the same melee damage as the Daedroth. It has less health. It has a freezing touch spell, a freezing bolt, and it also has a heal. So it has self-sustain to some degree, and then it has like 2 frost nukes. It does like to cast its frost spells, and it does like to heal itself when it's low. So if you want like a long duration Frost Atronach, or if you want to just make one from Frost Crag Spire, at least it heals itself, which is nice. So the heal only really matters if you plan on running it for longer than 60 seconds. Otherwise, you're probably better off just recasting, because if it's healing, it's not attacking. But it could be good. I would say it's like strong filler, or even potentially like almost endgame ready. You could make a build around it by giving it like frost weakness for nuking, so that it can frost weak nuke enemies. Also, if you have the Frostcrag one with you, At all times, it can heal itself and it can frost nuke. So you just have like a permanent summon that can ramp your damage and help you kill things. So I think it's like A tier. Next we have Spider Daedra. Spider Daedra is weird because it does a bunch of random things. It has like this poison spit ability, it has shock, it has this guard ability, and then it has heal major wounds, which doesn't really heal for that much in master mode. Its melee damage is weak. Every time I try using one of these, it just gets one-shotted by a Zivili, so I'm just gonna put this in like C tier. The thing that sucks though is you never get the Spiderling, which is why you would want this. If this thing summoned a Spiderling, just that would be S tier, because the Spiderling paralyzes, and then you get a thing that damages, and then you get a thing that paralyzes. But unfortunately, we get Spider Daedra at home, which does not do that much, and just kind of dies to most things quickly. It's like this one itself does not have paralyze, so it's just disappointing. It's just not very good. All right, next we're on to the master level stuff. So the Gloomwrath is actually kind of interesting because it has access to pretty big damage, and it also has an AoE silence, which is kind of crazy. So honestly, this thing should be S tier if used correctly, just based on the fact that it has an 80 damage Frost Touch spell and then a 70 damage Ice Bolt. That is absolutely insane. It also has this silence, the Silence of the Grave, that does 3 points Frost for 15 seconds, so that's 45 damage over time, and then has Silence 15 feet for 15 seconds. And then it also has base melee damage that, so based on this is not the Oblivion Remastered value, but it says 17 plus, in parentheses, level -3 divided by 2. So if we're like level 30, that would be 27, and then divided by 2, we'll just say is 13. So then you'd be looking at 30 points melee damage. But they did nerf the melee on all attacks of like summons and all the monsters and stuff. So very likely it's like 20-ish or so. But as you level up, it continues to get better. So this is interesting in that you have big abilities, assuming that these are the abilities it gets. It also has this absorb health, 4 points for 30 seconds, burden 50 for 30, damage willpower. So that's not really that good. It's okay. But the Arctic Blow, the Ice Bolt, also consider actually a single ramp plus an ice spell on this thing should be killing. So I'm going to give this thing a chance and put an S tier and then evaluate this more. I've used these, but I haven't tried ramping them before or throwing tank on them or something. So like I've summoned them, then they just get like 1 shot by Zivilis or like 2 to 3 shot by Zivilis. But the damage is good, and with a single ramp, it might be killing because it doesn't have the damage reduction you have as the player. So there could be a build where you summon one of these, put a ramp on something, and then it just starts one-shotting everything. It also has AoE silence, which is pretty insane. But that's, pretty interesting. All right, next we have the Voracious Hunger, which it's just bad. I've tried using it. You could throw tank on it, and maybe it's a little bit better. So the Hunger has this like absorb fatigue, 14 points or 5 seconds on touch. That's decent for reducing fatigue. But unfortunately, in Oblivion Remastered, this thing has 205 health, which is not that much, so it dies really quickly. So you pretty much have to put tank on it. At least the Daedroth can survive like a hit or two before it deals damage and dies. The Hunger, if it's fighting like certain enemies, will just instantly die, and it just doesn't do anything. The Lich, so the Lich is interesting because depending on what you get from randomness, it will be better or worse. So here's what it summons with. So 20 points melee damage, which is probably reduced to an OBR. Leveled staff, always greater / special. So depending on what staff it gets, it might be good. Same spells as standard Lich, except no summon spell. Major spells are always master. So standard Lich, if we look at a standard Lich, it has a leveled major summon undead spell. It has a leveled major absorb spell, a leveled major dispel, and a leveled major shield. So, then 3 leveled destruction spells, 2 major, 1 minor. So depending on what spells it gets for the destruction, it may or may not be good. The Lich is almost like gambling. Like, you truly don't know what you're getting. Sometimes you'll get a Lich that has cracked spells and just trivializes a fight. Other times you'll get it and it's just whatever. But also it doesn't have a summon spell. I was just reading off what a standard Lich has. So your summons do not get their own summons. So it'll just have like random spells, like utility spells, destruction spells. The other thing I found with Lich is that it very often will just do things that aren't relevant, and it'll just like do debuffs and random stuff that doesn't matter when you just want to be killing enemies. I'll put this in C tier. Obviously, it's random. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's really bad, but on average, it's just not immediately useful like other things are, and I just don't think it's very good. Replete Shambles is D tier. It doesn't function right now. They seriously need to patch their game. It just literally T-poses for me, and even when it does function, it seems to be quite weak. Storm Atronach. So Storm Atronach has no shock resistance summoned. Very disappointing, but it can lightning nuke, so I think with the right setup, it's good. Arguably, I could move this down, but with ramping lightning, this thing can one-shot, and it likes to spam lightning spells at range, and lightning is fast, so AI has a pretty easy time of hitting these lightning spells. Is this better than Frost? I would say a little bit. So I think that's where that's at. All right, next we have Zivali. So Zivali, it does have 50% spell absorb, but you get the unarmed version that cannot summon a Clan Fear. So it's not as strong as you would like. It does have like some big spells, but I think it needs to be given Magicka in order to use them for certain ones, but it does have potentially big spells. Now, if you were to throw 50% spell absorb on this, it still can die to melee. Like if it's 1v1ing an enemy Zivali, the enemy Zivali, especially if it has a weapon, it's just going to kill it in like 2 to 3 hits. I'm going to say Zivalis are like B tier. There's definitely better options. They're kind of hard to play around. If it's summoned to Clan Fear, easy S tier, because then it's like giving you an immediate army, whereas otherwise it's just kind of big and clunky. If it had a weapon, if it could summon a Clan Fear, these would make it much better, but because it can't summon a Clan Fear, and it's the unarmed version, it's just not as damaging. The hands version does less damage to you too, like hands are worse than the weapon version. The weapon version is really good. If we get the weapon version, just that's S tier. But unfortunately, we get the hands version, so it's not as good. And then finally, we have Dremora Lord. So Dremora Lord is interesting in that it actually has good magic resist. It has 45 magic resist. It has armor pieces too, so it does have armor rating. So you could throw more armor on it. Its damage output is decent. It does lower damage, but it attacks faster. And it does have a random destruction spell for Apprentice and Journeyman, and it will use them. So I would say it's like B tier. You could argue it's low A tier with tank thrown on it. Maybe it is. Some of these can move up depending on if there's optimal builds for them. But here's where I think the summons are at right now. I think Daedroth is clearly the best. It's the easiest to work around. Even if it just gets summoned, hits 3 or 4 times, and then dies. It's big damage, it's big value. It puts tank on itself to some degree, 20% shield. If you even put like 30 to 40% shield on it, it'll be tankier. Now, if you want to put it at armor cap, make a shield 65 spell for the duration, like for like 30, 40 seconds, throw that on it, and then it's basically unkillable and it can straight up win team fights. I've had this thing kill like 2 Zivalis and 2 Clan Fears on a long duration custom Daedroth summon that lasted like 120 seconds. And then I just kept putting tank on it like when it expired. And it basically doesn't die. Now against mages, that's a different story, but there's really not that many big mages. The mages are a threat versus you because they deal 6 times damage, whereas versus your Daedroth, it doesn't really deal that much damage to it. So unless it's like some huge spell, which is uncommon, even in master mode, you're usually fine. But I think Daedroth is clearly the best. And then the others can be better. Now, you could argue that the elemental ones are better with ramping, and I would agree with that. So if you're running destruction magic and conjuration, if you're using even just a single ramp spell, you're probably going to see them kill things in like 1 to 2 spells. Maybe 3 if they're lower magnitude. The Gloom Wraith has like the highest hitting spells. So it has Arctic Blow and Ice Bolt, which hit for 70 and 80 damage. I'm sorry, 80 and 70. So it has 2 huge nukes that should be able to kill off a single ramp. So potentially this is better than Daedroth when used with ramping, but Daedroth is better on anything. So you don't need ramp. You can just run it without tank. You can run it with tank. You can also run 100% Chameleon, which is hilarious, but that's a broken effect. So if you're at 100% spell effectiveness and you 100 Chameleon a summon, they are just now untargetable by enemies. So if you run this on like a Daedroth, it just like starts wrecking house and they can never discover it. Same thing with any of these. So you could 100% Chameleon these, but arguably that just breaks the game. But that is it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, found this useful. Peace.